Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes Sportsbook and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down next Saturday's UFC 189 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing an extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 9 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 70 went 1-0 to win 3.15 units overall. We won our underdog bet on Tony Sims, and we also won our free bet on the Lorenz Larkin Santiago Ponzinibbio under 2.5 rounds total. Back to the present, UFC 189 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on pay-per-view, Fox Sports 1, and UFC Fight Pass next Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now kicking things off on UFC Fight Pass is a lightweight contest between US Dennis Sedeno, who is 10-4, and Cody Pfister, who is 11-4-1. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Sedeno minus 190, the comeback on Pfister plus 150, and right now at 5 dimes it's minus 200 for Sedeno. The comeback on Pfister is plus 170. And again, as always, all lines are courtesy of our sponsor 5dimes.eu, so make sure you guys check those guys out. And getting into the matchup, this is basically your striker versus wrestler matchup. I mean, Sedeno is your striker and Pfister is your wrestler. That's exactly what they're going to look to do. Sedeno overall so far in the UFC, it's kind of mixed. I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of people expecting much better from Sedeno and his loss to Chavez, which Chavez, honestly, stylistically is a tough matchup for a lot of people out there. Just the way he fights, how tough the guy is, and what kind of pace he pushes to go along with his takedown. So I think that even though Chavez hasn't had really much success since that time, I think he's still a tougher fight than most people will give him credit for. So you could give Sedeno a little bit of leeway there, even though that wasn't the best performance, obviously, in his career. And then he came back, though. He rebounded nicely against Sanders and got him knocked out. He knocked him out he retired him by the end of the first round. It was a TKO stoppage because Sanders he took a lot of abuse in that fight as well. So, and that was, Sanders is the type of guy that's a very good wrestler, the type of guy that's going to obviously look to take the fight to the floor, and he didn't have much success against Sedeno, so you got to give him some credit there. And then, of course, Laprise in his last fight, Sedeno did struggle with the takedowns there. Laprise was able to get him down and control the tempo of that fight. That's how he lost that. So Pfister has to be a little bit confident knowing that Sedeno does have some weaknesses, and that's one being obviously the ground game, and that's exactly what Pfister's good at. Pfister, he's a tough live vet, actually. He lost to Vince Pichel by submission to get into the house, and he got a shot, obviously, to make his UFC debut, but Mutasari just dominated him. Mutasari, again, another one of these guys that's honestly an underrated fighter, very good takedown defense, and an amazing striker. So that was stylistically a tough matchup for Pfister in that fight. So I give him a little bit of credit for that because, he hung in there, he took some punishment, and he ended up ultimately getting rear naked choked in the second round and getting beat there. But still, I think this matchup, even though Sedeno is a very dangerous striker and improving his overall game, he still, I don't think, is dangerous as Mutasari in that spot. And I think Mutasari actually has better takedown defense than Sedeno as well. So this is a fight that's, I think, a little bit easier for Pfister, but it's still going to be a tough battle for sure because, with Sedeno, again, he knows what Pfister's going to bring to the table. He's going to want to sprawl and brawl in this fight, and he could be very well effective doing that. But Pfister's the type of guy, he's got some nice kickboxing experience, but he's primarily a wrestler grinder. And it's not really, even though he's got some kickboxing experience, it doesn't show in the cage thus far. I think his striking is pretty weak, to be honest with you. But he is the type of guy that's very aggressive with his takedowns, shoots in almost immediately. So basically he looks for his striking to set up his takedown game. He does have good ground and pound, Pfister does, when he gets on top. And he does have a decent sub game as well, offensively at least. His sub defense, again, a little bit concerning and questionable. So Pfister's going to look to come in and take this fight to the floor. He could have some success there. Sedeno's going to look to sprawl and brawl. So it's whoever really implements their game plan the best is going to win this fight. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Sedeno because I think he's just a little bit better at this point. I think he could be a little bit more effective if he stays off his back, and I think that he is going to be getting better fight by fight in doing so, and it's going to be a little bit harder for Pfister to put him down. And then obviously he's going to have such a big advantage on the feet. So I am leaning towards Sedeno, but as far as a bet, it is a dog or pass situation because, again, you have a wrestler that's going to look to take the fight to the ground versus a guy that's been put on his back before. So I don't think you can lay the juice on Sedeno in this spot. So it's a tough one to bet, tough one to pick a little bit, but I do slightly lean towards Sedeno to get the W here in this spot.
Now, I know Cody Pfister's UFC debut was on a bit of short notice, but it was not impressive whatsoever. Ended up resulting in a second-round submission loss to James Muntasiri, and he really didn't get anything going in that fight. He kind of just was deer in the headlights, and he didn't get any takedowns. It was just an ugly performance. He really just stood and traded, and he was against a better striker, and he ended up losing. So with Sedeno, he's again facing a better striker. Sedeno isn't as technical as Muntasiri was, but he is just as powerful, and he can be very explosive and dangerous. He's just a lot sloppier with his technique. So Pfister might be able to hold his own with a decent output on the feet, but in terms of damage, Sedeno definitely has the much higher threat of getting a knockout on the feet, and I just think Sedeno is probably going to be the guy that can control things just because he is so quick and kind of crafty on the feet. He can pull out a lot of diverse attacks that Pfister might not see coming. Now, in terms of the ground game, Sedeno's biggest weakness so far in the UFC has been his inability to stop really good takedowns. Chad Laprise completely dominated him in his last fight because of that. And in his UFC debut, he was looking okay and then just couldn't stop Chavez's takedowns and ended up losing that decision. So it's really only been when he's been able to stop takedowns that he's been able to punish wrestlers like the Gerard Sanders fight, although he was a full weight class or two bigger than that guy. So this is the first time he's facing a wrestler that's his size that I think that he can actually stop the takedowns and stay upright and keep things going. And who knows, maybe Cody Pfister won't even try to get takedowns. He didn't in his last fight when he clearly should have against Muntasiri. And it might backfire on him again if he comes in with a similar game plan. So all things said, I think Justinas Sedeno is the better overall fighter. And if he does get taken down, I think while he isn't the most technical guy, he should be athletic enough to just scramble back to his feet, because I don't think Pfister is a good enough ground game to keep him down. So I think Justinas Sedeno stays standing for the majority of this fight, and at some point he cracks Pfister and either knocks him out or wins a decision. So my pick is Sedeno. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Neil Siri, who is 15-10, taking on Luis Smolka, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Smoka -170, the comeback on Siri +130, and there has been some action on the dog right now at 5dimes.eu. It's actually Smoka -115, Siri at -105, so virtually pick him with a slight lean towards Smoka. Man, it's hard to argue on Siri, betting on Siri, because he's such a good fighter, underrated fighter. I mean, if you look at his record, he's 15-10, but he's way above and beyond that as far as talent-wise. He's a savvy vet, been around for a long time. And he's got some respectable wins, especially, I mean, in Cage Warriors. I have a lot of respect for that organization. They match fights up well. I mean, they challenge fighters. And if you get some W's in Cage Warriors, which Siri has quite a few, then it's something to be said, and you got to respect that. And then, of course, in the UFC, since he's come in to the UFC, he had a very competitive fight against Picket, and he's reeled off 2 straight wins since then. So Siri on a bit of a roll here, and he's just a quality fighter. I think Siri, in the stand-up game, he's tremendous. His boxing's really good. He has a ton of knockout power to go along with that. Those good hands. He mixes up things well. He's got good kickboxing overall as well. And then, of course, his wrestling takedown defense, I think, is very solid. He's got good submissions offensively. Now, you could say that his sub defense is a little bit questionable, and I think that is going to come into play here against Smoka. I'll get into that a little bit later. But Siri, from top to bottom, I mean, he's fought like I said, in solid organizations, fought against solid competition, and the guy just continues to improve. The one bad thing about Siri is he is 35 at this point, so he's kind of, I think, hitting the end of his career, and that is a shame. But as far as a decline goes, I haven't really seen it yet, though. I mean, Siri's putting in the work. He still looks fresh enough. He doesn't fight like a 35-year-old, so he just does definitely still have the skill set to make this an interesting fight. And he's been nothing but impressive. Again, his win over Beal was really impressive. A lot of people counted him out in that fight, and he came through with looking great, really. I mean, that was a good quality win for him. And then again, even in his fight against Harris, I mean, same spot. A lot of people kind of questioned him in that fight as well, and he came through. So Siri's a hard guy to take down, hard guy to control, hard guy to outstrike, and just a hard guy to beat. But Smoka, on the other hand, he does present some problems to Siri because, first of all, I mean, he's only 23 years old, so he's got the youth on his side. And with that comes, I mean, fight by fight, I think you'll see improvements from Smoka. Now, I know this is going to kind of contradict what I just said because I think his debut win against Oskilic was really impressive, and then we've kind of had a little bit of a letdown in his fight against Cariaso and his fight against Vasulik because we were expecting a little bit more for Smoka. I mean, he's got huge reach for the weight class, and he's got skill to go along with it, whether it's standing up or on the ground. So he's, again, the complete fighter. These guys match up really well. Smoka's just a little bit longer, a little bit younger. I think Siri is the more technical striker of the two, but Smoka can do some damage on the feet as well. And then the intriguing part here is I think Smoka's ground game. Smoka's going to go for some takedowns here. He might not be able to get him easily, but if the fight hits a floor, I think Smoka's length is going to actually present some problems for Siri as well, because I think Smoka, his BJJ is legit. He's sneaky good with it, and I think that, again, being so long, he could get Siri in some spots that he might not be comfortable where he used to. So I think this fight's going to go back and forth. It's going to be very competitive. It hits the scorecards. I could see it being a split decision type of fight. So the odds where they are now is actually a pretty good spot, and I do understand them, and they're, I think, a little bit better and more accurate than what my original opener was. But that all being said, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards the youth here, and I'm going to go Smoka's way. I'm expecting, again, a tremendous fight, but I think that Smoka's just going to be a little bit too much for Siri, and I think he is going to find a way to win this, either if it's a close decision on the cards or maybe by submission for Smoka as well. And you cannot count out the striking. I mean, he's long enough that, I mean, he can land some strike and do some damage on the feet. So I do lean a little bit more towards Smoka in this fight.
Now, if this fight had taken place right after both men's respective UFC debuts, I definitely would have picked Smoka. But now that we've had a chance to see them both compete 3 times inside the octagon, you gotta lean towards Siri. I know he's older, like 12 years older than Smoka. He's given up a little bit of reach and height. But, man, this guy is a very talented mixed martial artist. I mean, most of his losses in his career have come because he was fighting out of his weight class or against some really good ground fighters before he really learned and developed some solid submission defense. And now that he's actually started to add that to his game, even though he's a little later in his career, he's at the best he's ever been in his career despite being 35 years old. So I really do think that Neil Siri is a threat right now in the flyweight division. Now, he's the better boxer of the two between Smoka, despite giving up the reach. He doesn't throw a ton of kicks, but he mixes it up well. And you even saw in his last fight against Chris Beal, his conditioning was better than a fighter way younger than him. And we haven't really seen his chin tested a lot, but that's mainly because his defense and movement is so good on the feet, he doesn't really get hit a ton. So overall, I actually think that Neil Siri is hands down the better mixed martial artist between himself and Luis Smoka. Smoka's biggest strength throughout his career historically has been getting takedowns, getting on top of people, and punishing them with ground and pound. But Siri has some pretty decent takedown defense. It's improving. He can get taken down, but he usually gets up pretty quickly. And while he has a bit of power, I don't know if he has enough power to end a fight against Smoka. So I think this fight does go the distance. So Smoka's always going to be dangerous, and he can throw out random strikes like that crazy high kick that put out Richie Vasulik in his last fight. So that's always something to keep an eye on. But I just really think that Neil Siri is going to be able to put enough pressure on Smoka to keep him moving backwards. He'll be able to keep this fight standing for at least long enough to win enough rounds to take a decision. So I don't think the age is too much of an issue in this fight, as Siri has proved in his last few. So I think Neil Siri is my pick. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, we've got 2 guys with 3 fights each. Not a ton of data to work with, but there is enough to support some of the points you guys are making. First of all, Neil Siri he is going to be much older and shorter range than Louis Smoka, and that's a big red flag for any matchup. So normally when you see basically pick 'em odds, I would lean the other way and just say go with the younger, longer guy. But let's look at the actual matchup stats here. Neil Siri is the more technical guy. They tend to match the pace of their opponents, although Smoka admittedly works at a slightly higher overall pace on average. But Siri is much more accurate and has much better defense in terms of avoidance. So in terms of technical striking, Siri is hitting his opponents and he's not getting hit back, whereas Smoka it's basically 1-1. He delivers one, he gets one. So overall, that should favor Siri on the feet. Now, on the mat, Smoka is attempting a lot of takedowns. Siri is not. Siri's takedown defense is good, but since he attempts so few himself, he generally has been controlled on the mat. So that's the profile of a guy who prefers to stand and trade, whereas Smoka is trying to mix it up. So again, there is some reason to think maybe Smoka is going to be he's going to be the hustler here. He's going to be more aggressive. Maybe he gets hit a few times, but at least this is the flyweight division. It's not like he's going to get his head knocked off. Maybe he's going to mix in his wrestling. He's going to make it work and grind this out. Or Siri is going to be able to stuff those takedowns, and then he's going to get the one with the better hands. Honestly, I don't have a strong opinion either way here. I do agree that the line is close. It should stay close. And there's not enough data for a formal pick, but we do see supporting evidence for the points you guys have made, and I can understand why the decision is split here.
Now moving up to the bantamweight division for the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Cody Garbrandt, who is 6-0, taking on Henry Briones, who is 19-4-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Garbrandt minus 380, the comeback on Briones plus 260, and right now it is Garbrandt minus 550, the comeback on Briones is 425 at 5-9. So more support coming in on Garbrandt, a lot of parlay action going in there as well. So he's basically turned from a 4-1 favorite to a 5-1 favorite and climbing. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to include Garbrandt in parlays here a lot more as we go. So we could see the line climb even higher. So that being said, man, it's a tough matchup for Briones, honestly. Getting into him a little bit first, he's a tough Latin America vet, was actually dominating his fight on the show and then honestly lost by a crazy upkick KO. So got to question that chin a little bit in that aspect. I mean, overall throughout his career, though, Briones has never been knocked out, but he is 34 years old. He's kind of getting to that point where we could see some decline, and that chin has to be getting a little bit worse. And he's fighting a very explosive athlete in Garbrandt that I'll get into a little bit more here in a second. But his fight in the UFC, his debut, Briones actually had a successful comeback win by rear naked choke after landing a big uppercut in his fight over Canetti, in his win over Canetti, I should say. So he was losing that fight and, looked like he was about to get beaten. Then he landed a huge uppercut and was able to get the job done there. So Briones is one of those guys that's basically a savvy vet that, he's seen pretty much all situations throughout his career. He's a well-rounded fighter. He's just not great. He doesn't really excel in any particular area. He just has a game everywhere the fight takes place. He can definitely cause you some problems, but he's not one of these guys that even on the feet is going to just totally dominate somebody or that you have to really fear of that knockout blow. Although he does have some knockout power, don't get me wrong, and he does have submission ability. So like I said, he's a very well-rounded fighter. He's just not great, again, in any particular area. And he's fighting a guy in Garbrandt, which again, he's a very explosive athlete. He's 10 years younger, Garbrandt is. He's training, obviously, with a great camp, especially for the bantamweight weight class. How could you get much better right now than the alpha male crew over there? So with Uriah Faber and all those guys. Garbrandt also actually trains here in Ohio with the Strong Style Gym where Stipe and Jess Guy train from time to time as well. So between those camps, he's getting some really good work in. And again, the hype around this guy's been around for a little while, and then he's been more than impressive, honestly, throughout his UFC career thus far. I know it was only one fight against Brimage, so I really shouldn't say much of a career, but Garbrandt was in a firefight with Brimage, obviously, and he did well. He was able to do what a lot of people really couldn't do, minus McGregor there, and finish Brimage, which was very impressive. I think what you're going to see here is, Garbrandt has the advantage as far as pure wrestling goes, so he's going to be able to stifle Bionas as far as when Bionas looks to take this fight to the ground, he's not going to be able to do so. I think Garbrandt's going to look to keep this fight up, and on the feet, he's going to have the speed advantage, the power advantage, the striking advantage, just the overall finishing ability to win this fight. So this fight is perfectly catered, I think, for him. He's a younger, fresher fighter, the guy that's kind of trying to make his climb, make his impact on the bantamweight division after a successful UFC debut. And he's fighting kind of the savvy vet that doesn't really, I think, in my mind, even though he hasn't had a lot of UFC fights, obviously Bionas hasn't, he's still on the kind of latter part of his career. So I think it's Garbrandt's fight to win or lose. I think we are going to probably see Garbrandt land another devastating blow, whether it's a knee, whether it's an elbow, whether it's a punch, and finally get Bionas out of there. So I think that's how it's going to play out. It's Garbrandt's fight to win or lose. Everybody seems to agree, and I think it is going to play out that way. Garbrandt by TKO or KO.
This is going to be a tough fight for Bionas. I just think that Cody Garbrandt is better than him in every single facet of MMA. You look at it, and Bionas was losing to Canetti in that fight before he caught him. The only advantage he had in that fight was that he was facing an older fighter that didn't have a very good chin. And the second he hurt Canetti, I admire his killer instinct and that he went for it and put him away. But, man, if he was having trouble with Canetti, I think he is going to have just nightmares against Cody Garbrandt. Garbrandt has spectacular boxing, excellent power, great footwork, good movement, and he has some really solid wrestling to fall back on, too, if he needs it. And I just don't see any place in this fight that Bionas has a chance other than a puncher's chance, because Garbrandt's defense isn't the greatest. So if he leaves his chin out there and exposes himself a little too much going for a wild combination, then maybe Bionas can hurt him. But, man, I don't see it happening. I think Cody Garbrandt is the real deal. He proved it in that UFC debut against Marcus Brimage when he got the knockout, and he looked terrific. And against a guy like Bionas, I think it's actually a step down in competition. And as long as Cody doesn't treat it like a step down, and he just has continued putting in the work and time in the gym and busting his butt and coming out here and looking to get even better, then I think that he is going to not just win against Bionas, but win convincingly. I see a first-round knockout in the future here with this fight, and I don't see any other way around it other than a fluke knockout for Bionas. But, yeah, my pick officially will be Cody Garbrandt. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Cathal Pendred, who is 17-3-1, taking on John Howard, who is 22-11. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Pendred minus 190, the comeback on Howard plus 150, and looking over at 5 dimes right now, it is Pendred minus 125, the comeback on Howard plus 105. So early dog action coming in on Howard. Man, love him or hate him. Well, most people seem to hate Pendred out there. You got to respect the guy, though. The guy has been really good, Pendred has, in his UFC career. Now, really good to the point where I know he's got some questionable decisions. His fight against Umalatov, actually, I bet the other side, and I honestly thought Umalatov won that fight. I'm sure Brian agrees with it as well. It was a competitive fight but the truth is, he was competitive enough that the judges can mess it up. So you got to give Pendred, love him or hate him, you got to give him credit for that kind of fight as well. So I think a lot of people just aren't sold on Pendred yet because all of his performances thus far have been close, competitive. Minus his last fight, honestly, against Montano. I think he obviously won that fight pretty clear. The rest of the time against Spencer, like I said, Umalatov, even against Mike King in his official UFC debut, King almost finished him, and then he came back and won that fight. So again, you got to give him credit for that as well. But overall, skill set for skill set, I think it's no question in my mind that I think Howard is the better MMA fighter because I think he's a little bit more explosive. He's a little bit more dangerous on the feet. I think his kickboxing game overall, his striking game is better than Pendred's on the feet. Howard is a very well-rounded fighter as well. He's got some good takedowns, got some good wrestling, has some decent wrestling defense, got a sub game. There's not much bad you can say about Howard, although against stronger fighters that do like to push a pace and that can put Howard on his back, even though I said he has decent wrestling and decent takedown defense, that seems to be his kryptonite as well against other guys that are capable of putting him on his back, getting him in some problems, or even pushing a high pace against Howard. And that's kind of what Pendred is here, though. That's the problem. And that's why I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Pendred, because even though I think that Howard is, in fact, the better MMA fighter, I think Pendred still, with the style of fight that he brings to the table, he's going to be pushing the higher pace. Howard in his last few performances, he hasn't looked great. He's looked a little flat. I mean, he got knocked out against Larkin, which it is what it is. I mean, Larkin's looked great really at 170 since he dropped down, and Larkin's a very impressive striker in his own right, so he can knock out a lot of people. You can't really take much from that other than the fact that Howard might be starting to hit that decline spot because his fight against Ebersol was a little bit lackluster. He was competitive against LaFleur, and LaFleur's a very solid competitor, but it just seems like he just hasn't showed his best recently. So it's kind of what have you done for me lately? And the truth is, Pendred has showed up. He's getting better fight by fight. He's getting more confidence. He's going to have a significant size advantage in this fight. He's going to be taller. He's going to be just officially longer in reach as well. And again, it's the pace that he pushes, I think, that's going to ultimately win him this fight. He might be able to get top position on Howard. He's going to hold him up against a cage at one point or another for sure. He's going to try to look for those takedowns, and he might be successful doing so. If Howard's able to take Pendred down, I mean, Pendred does have pretty solid takedown defense. I don't think he's going to be able to hold Pendred down, and I don't think he's going to push a high enough pace to win on the scorecards either. So, in my opinion, it's going to be a close competitive fight if it does hit the cards, but it's going to favor Pendred. So Howard's best chance to win this fight is actually knocking Pendred out. And even though Pendred's strike defense and his chin, in my opinion, are a little suspect, I'm not sure if Howard's going to be able to do that. So that's why I got to lean a little bit more towards Pendred. I think this fight is going to hit the scorecards. I don't think Pendred is a dangerous enough striker that will end up knocking Howard out. Now, he does have enough power to do so, but I just don't think he's going to put it all together and be that much of a threat to Howard. So I do think this fight hits the scorecards, and I do think it's going to be another close competitive fight, but I do think Pendred's probably going to come away with a win. So I am going to lean towards Pendred to win this fight.
The main thing is it's the dynamic of Howard's power and Pendred's really bad chin but decent recovery, because Pendred gets cracked in every single one of his fights and hurt, but then he comes back and then he's won every single one of his UFC fights. You can argue with the judges all you want, but at least officially he's still undefeated in the UFC. Now, Pendred's last fight, he finally faced somebody that wasn't as good as him, and he actually was able to outwork Augusto Montano and win a very ugly, not entertaining whatsoever decision. This time around against John Howard, I think it's similar in that Howard doesn't have a high output. He's not the type of guy that just goes out there and wins rounds. He's more the guy that maybe he can push you against the fence, and maybe he can knock you out. But when he's not able to do that, it's going to be tough for him because he does not throw with a lot of high volume. He has okay wrestling, but I don't think it's better than Pendred's. So in this fight, basically Pendred's going to have a big size advantage. He's going to be about 6 inches taller with a longer reach. And then in terms of the grappling, I actually expect Pendred to be the guy that potentially is going to be looking for takedowns and pushing Howard into the fence. So I expect another ugly, grinding war of attrition, and if there's any chance for a finish, it's probably Howard landing a big, crazy punch out of nowhere. But he might be a little gun-shy, considering Lorenz Larkin put his lights out in his last fight for the first time in the UFC. So I think with that factored in, it's ripe for Cathal Pendred to just eke out another ugly, close decision and stay undefeated in the UFC. So my pick is going to be Cathal Pendred. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you're right. This is kind of an ugly matchup. I mean, these guys don't excel in one area. They aren't superlative in any way. They are both grinders. They've both been involved in a lot of decisions where it was just a tough back and forth fight. So the numbers agree with that. So first of all, when you look at the stats, John Howard does have more knockdown power. He actually has above average power, while Pendred has below average chin. But he has recovered from those. You know, he's been dropped and then come back and won, which is actually an unusual thing. He's now done it a couple times. So that kind of evens out. Also, you've got Howard maybe has slightly better striking in terms of accuracy, slightly better defense, but he does not keep up with his opponents. He really tends to get outworked. And that could be the difference here, because Pendred knows how to try to hustle his guys. You know, he hustles you for 2 rounds and then he gets completely outstruck in another round, but he ends up coming away with a close decision. So it's a lot of back and forth here on the feet, especially since if you want Howard to be able to use that power, keep in mind he's gonna be at the reach disadvantage here. So on the ground, you know, Howard is a wrestler, and yet his ground stats are not that great. Granted, these career stats go back quite a ways, and Pendred has landed takedowns. He used takedowns to win one of the rounds in his most recent fight. That was the big difference. I mean, his striking wasn't all that great, but he took that middle swing round with his takedowns before getting outworked. So there is a lot of back and forth here. I think the safest play, right, is that this is probably going to go to a decision. This is going to be a close fight, and I wouldn't want to have to pick this one. It's more of a coin flip matchup for me. But most importantly, I think it's going the distance.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Mike Swick returning with a 15-5 record, taking on Alex Garcia, who is 12-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Garcia minus 260 to come back on Swick plus 180, and action has come in on Garcia. He's minus 380 right now. Comeback is plus 315. Tough one, because honestly, in his prime, Swick, I think, would do really well against Garcia. And it's hard to set a line on Swick because of his talent level. I mean, his skill set. I mean, he's a veteran. He was once considered, honestly, at welterweight, a title contender. So, but all that being said, I mean, Zwick's had some problems lately. I mean, he's been out since his KO loss to Matt Brown in 2012. He has not fought. A lot of us, including myself, were thinking that Swick was pretty much done. Maybe not even on the UFC roster still. And then sure enough, I mean, here we are in 2015. Swick is back again, at age 36, taking on the younger, the explosive and talented Alex Garcia. So I understand a lot of people are coming in on Garcia because they think, man, Swick seriously still on the roster. He's, you know what I mean? He's looked like a shell of himself the last few fights, and now he's fighting a guy that can definitely do some damage, and it's going to be a difficult matchup. So I think that's why everybody's firing on Garcia, and I can understand it because I do lean towards Garcia myself with this one. I mean, it's really hard to depend and pick a guy like Swick, even though he does have a talented skill set. I mean, the guy on the feet, you know, he's long. Obviously, he's going to have a reach advantage over Garcia. He knows how to use his reach well. He's got knockout power in his hands. The guy has a nasty guillotine choke, if you will. And he's got a very decent takedown game, a decent wrestling game in his own right offensively as well. So he's got, again, the total package. But the problem is, again, it's the fact that Swick has been out for so long. I mean, before that, he did get knocked out, again, by Brown. He had a pretty competitive fight against DeMarcus Johnson, but he was in some serious trouble in that fight as well. Dating all the way back to Paulo Thiago before Thiago actually choked him out. So Swick hasn't looked all that great, and with the time off, I don't think it's helped him much. I mean, and of course he's had some medical condition that he's had to deal with throughout his career. We found out the last several years as well. So I think a lot of red flags surrounding Swick at this point. And with Garcia, honestly, if anything that I'm not comfortable with Garcia is that he's been a little bit of a letdown, to be honest with you. I mean, the guy is a very explosive athlete. There was a lot of buzz around him before he made his UFC debut. I mean, I remember opening the line against Garcia, and it's just skyrocketing in his UFC debut over Wall. Everybody was just going nuts betting him. Of course, it's against Ben Wall, so I do understand it. But that being said, there's just a lot of untested things with Garcia, and one of them is honestly his cardio. One flaw that he's got. I mean, he does tend to slow down as the fight goes. His chin is not what you'd like to see in a very, I guess, capable fighter, a guy that at one time or another was a prospect, and he's still considered, I guess, a prospect in most people's minds. But his chin and his cardio, two things that you cannot have weak at times, especially if you're trying to make a run towards the UFC welterweight title, because that division is just filled with outstanding talent. One good thing that Garcia does have going for him, I mean, he trains with outstanding camp with TriStar. He has good training partners, and he does have the skill set to make a run. It's just, like I said, that defense a little bit, cardio, the chin, all a little bit suspect. And his last fight against Magny, I was surprised how easy Magny was able to get him to the floor and control the ground a little bit in that fight as well. Of course, Garcia had his moments on the ground in that fight as well, but still, I thought that Garcia would actually have the advantage in a pure wrestling match in that spot. And same thing here with Swick. I think that Garcia should have more of the advantage here because I think he is the better wrestler overall. I think he's going to have the speed and power advantage here over Swick, and I think that he's actually, again, the younger, fresher fighter. Swick's best shot here is honestly landing the knockout blow, which, hey, you can't count him out. I mean, even at 36, you do have some power left in you, and you still got that killer instinct. So I wouldn't be shocked if Swick does land a knockout blow on Garcia, but overall, I'd be surprised. And I think that it's Garcia's fight to win or lose. So you got to lean with the younger, I think at this point, better fighter in Garcia.
Yeah, the biggest thing that scares me about Swick is just how inactive he's been. I mean, it's been 2.5 years since we last saw him compete in the octagon, and this will only be his third fight in the last 5 years overall. Now, he did have that brief run in 2012 2012, I think, or 2013. But man, he just has not been able to stay healthy or motivated or whatever it's been. Obviously, he had some health conditions that led to his first lengthy hiatus, but this last one, he's been spending some time in Thailand, working over there, and then just doing a lot of stuff that wasn't really related to fighting. And I guess maybe he just wants to find out what he has left. And the UFC is not doing him any favors. The last time he came back after the long break, they gave him to Marcus Johnson, which was a fight where he was picture perfect, made for him to make an impressive return, and then obviously he had the loss against Matt Brown. This time around, Alex Garcia, he is a much more dangerous prospect with a ton of power, good offensive wrestling, and dangerous ground and pound. This is a guy that Mike Swick is going to have to be extremely careful against, especially early in the fight. Alex Garcia, while he is an extremely dangerous fighter early on, he does slow down. He does not handle pressure well. He does not handle well when he gets hit. So I think basically Swick needs to weather that early storm. And if he does have a chance to come back. But he's never really been the type of fighter that comes back. He's been more the guy that is the one that puts the pressure on. That's how he was able to have such good success when he first dropped down to welterweight and became a threat in the division. So in this fight, I'm very concerned. I mean, unlike Neil Siri, who's competing at the best in his career at 35 years old, Mike Swick has not been competing the best in his career. He has been so inactive, so rusty, and there's just way too many question marks about how he's going to perform against these new waves of MMA fighters. And I just think this is going to be too much for him, and Alex Garcia is probably going to overwhelm him quickly and probably put him away in the first round. So my pick is Alex Garcia to get the win. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I'm a huge Mike Swick fan, and it pains me to say this, but yeah, this layoff of nearly 1,000 days is absurd. He's 36 years old. He's trying to make this comeback after having some health problems that affected his weight. But to his credit, he has been very active. He has been training in Thailand, really focusing on his striking, which was already very dangerous. I mean, this is a guy who rattled off 4 first-round finishes for his first UFC fights that, none of them got out of the first round. It was amazing. He looked like he was on a tear, and then, of course, he had all these issues. He kept dropping weight because he couldn't eat. Now he's gotten past that. He's got his health in check. But you got to wonder why the 3-year layoff after a knockout loss. That was surprising. I was there, front row in Seattle when he got knocked out by Matt Brown. It happened out of nowhere. He just didn't look like himself. So you got to be wondering what's going through his head trying to do this. Is he just coming back for one last run? More for fun, more for the hell of it, just to do it because he knows his time is running out, or does he really think that he's improved his skills enough to compete with this generation of fighters? He is much older than his opponent, Alex Garcia. Granted, Swick does have the range. He's always been a very long guy, 77-inch reach, very long for welterweight. But his accuracy is actually not all that great. He's actually a swarm fighter. He outworks his opponents and he hits very hard. But his accuracy isn't all that great. And Alex Garcia is more of a counter guy. Very, very precise, also fairly powerful, but doesn't tend to keep up with his opponents, even though he tends to average as high a striking rate as Swick. So he's more in barn burners than Swick is, which is weird, because Swick is, we associate him with these crazy fast fights. Swick's chin now, definitely, he's only been dropped twice, but he hasn't been hit that much. And so that's a big red flag. Garcia could tag him. I could see this fight going either way. There is a huge unknown with Mike Swick at this point. We don't know what kind of guy, what kind of condition he's going to step into the cage with. So for this price, there's no way I would lay that kind of juice. Mike Swick is a grizzled veteran. He has faced much more talented opponents. He's gone the distance with Dan Hardy in a title eliminator. This is a guy who was a very high level competitor. His striking is very, very clean. So there are some red flags there that I would not lay the juice on the favorite here. If anything, I would look for a long shot prop on Swick by knockout or something. But honestly, this fight probably doesn't go the distance because these guys both have finishing potential. They both have some holes. Garcia gets hit a lot. We haven't really seen him get finished. Swick doesn't get hit a lot, but when he does, he he gets knocked out. So there are some defensive holes on both sides as well as weapons. So that all spells if they go toe to toe, one of them could hurt the other one, and it shouldn't go to a distance.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Matt Brown, who is 21-13, taking on Tim Means, who is 24-6-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Brown minus 190. The comeback on Means plus 150. And line margins basically tightened up a little bit. Right now it's Brown minus 190. The comeback on Means is plus 165. So two-way action will come in on this fight. Both these guys are just outstanding warriors, man. I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. So this is, from a fight fan's perspective, we can't ask for anything more. I mean, I wish there was more fights like this on the card and more cards as well, because we're going to see two guys that give it their all, that are going to put on a great show for everybody, that, I mean, are tough as nails and have the ability to finish one another. No doubt about that. So really looking forward to this fight, because this is just awesomeness written all over it from every which angle. But it's a tough one to pick because of that as well. Of course, we all know how good Brown has been. I mean, he went on that crazy good run. And he's beaten solid competition along the way. A lot of people weren't expecting him to go on that run, but he's improved because of the work he's put in and the confidence he's gained fight by fight. And he knows, even in his losses, I mean, he's coming off 2 back-to-back losses over Hendricks and Lawler, but those are obviously 2 guys. I mean, one of them's a champion and the other guy just had the belt before that. So, and he was very competitive in those fights. So he's right there with the best at welterweight, which is something outstanding to be said, because the welterweight division has been stacked for years now. Arguably the best division that UFC's had. So Means, on the other hand, I mean, he's really been outstanding as well. I know he was fighting down at lightweight for a while. He's been kind of floating back and forth between weight classes now, though, since he did move back up to welterweight outside of his fight to Magny, which was fairly close. I mean, Means almost pulled that off, so he's competitive in that fight, and we know how good Magny's been doing lately. But besides that, I mean, he's on a 4-fight winning streak himself, and he's looked, I think, more impressive fight by fight, to be honest with you. So, especially his last fight against Sullivan, I wasn't expecting him to just run through a tough, gritty fighter like Sullivan like he did. I mean, Means was able to control the wrestling in that fight. He just showed his, the killer instinct and that nastiness he has about him as well, which Brown does have that in him. So that's why this fight's going to be so interesting and entertaining, I think, along the way. So you can say a lot of good things. And honestly, if you look throughout his career, I haven't seen many people outstrike Means. I haven't seen many people outstrike Means in his fights, and he's faced some pretty good strikers along the way. So that says a lot, in my opinion, because he's going to have another outstanding striker across from him in Brown here. So tough fight to call, but I think it is kind of a dog or pass situation according to the odds. Because, I mean, I'm expecting this fight to go back and forth and just take place all over the octagon, whether, a guy hits a takedown or not. I mean, that's what's going to be interesting, because Brown honestly has underrated wrestling in his own right. Of course, Brown's flaw at times is his takedown defense. He does get put on his back and controlled a little bit there, but he's been working on that. He's also improved his submission defense. I mean, just look at his fight with Eric Silva. I mean, honestly, not too long ago, Eric Silva would have been able to finish a guy like Brown, but Brown showed his toughness and his heart in that fight, showed his improved submission defense, and I mean, he's just on a different level than he once was. So, again, that's all the hard work he's been putting in. But then on the other end, Means, I think, has looked confident. He's looked great. He knows that 170 is the right fit for him as far as weight class goes. He's not cutting too much weight. He's comfortable. He's happy there. And he just goes out and performs. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So it's a very difficult fight, because I could see it playing out so many different ways. But I'm going to lean towards the underdog Means. He is, I think, out of the two fighters, he's a little bit, I want to say a little bit fresher. I don't think there's going to be as much of a letdown at this point for Means as there might be for Brown. I mean, Brown's expected to win this fight. He's expected to do well, but he's facing a tough competitor in Means. I know he looked outstanding even against another outstanding striker in Lawler, but Means is a different type of striker, I think, and Means is going to be the kind of guy that's in his face. He goes to the body well, which I think benefits Means as well, because Brown, if anything, if you see any flaws in Brown's striking game, it is his body. I mean, he's been tagged to the body, he's been hurt to the body in a few of his fights, and Means does go to the body quite often, and he's effective with that as well. So I think Means is going to mix things up enough. He's going to take some punishment along the way, but I think Means is going to probably do enough to, I think, at least outpoint Brown. We might see a finish here as well. But it is definitely a difficult fight to pick, because both these guys are going to bring it. I am going to lean towards Means a little bit more, and I think he is going to probably come away with the win here.
the public is on Matt Brown just because of the name value, and he was in the title picture, and he's still in the top 10 in the welterweight division. But this fight is so much closer than people are giving it credit for. I mean, Matt Brown is a very dangerous fighter with really good striking, very scrappy brawler. But Tim Means, I mean, he's never really been outstruck in the UFC. He's a very dangerous stand-up fighter, has huge power, can take a shot, and he's actually, despite having previously fought a little bit at lightweight, this guy is bigger than Matt Brown. So since moving up to welterweight, he's looked phenomenal. He looked really good in his last fight against George Sullivan, just completely destroyed him, and actually even was better than Sullivan on the ground, which I don't think anybody was really expecting. So this guy has been putting in the time, and he's clearly making some big improvements. Now, Matt Brown, yeah, he's lost a couple fights recently, but man, you got to look at who he lost to. He's lost to the Johnny Hendricks, the former champ, and Robbie Lawler, the current champ. And it's not like he got blown out in those fights, especially Lawler. I mean, that fight was really close, and he was in it for the whole 5 rounds. So you have to definitely think that Matt Brown is always in a fight, and especially against a guy that's probably not going to be taking him down, and Tim Means, it's definitely dangerous. So Matt Brown, I think the biggest thing that he relies on is the fact that he has some of the best durability of anybody in the welterweight division. Yeah, his body shots maybe is a little bit exposed, but in terms of headshots, that's something that I don't think anybody in the welterweight division can really stand up to. Is this guy is so tough, and if Tim Means really spends a lot of time going for that head, I think he's going to be wasting it. And Matt Brown is probably just going to bite down on the mouthpiece and keep plugging forward, and I expect this fight to probably be one of the most entertaining on the entire card. So overall, I think this fight's going to be really competitive, really close, and it means it's going to do better than expected, but despite that, I'm still slightly leaning Matt Brown. I think he either wins a decision or maybe stops Tim Means with strikes late. So my pick is officially Matt Brown. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you. I do think there's a lot of excitement here. Both guys are aggressive. And I agree with you also that Matt Brown has simply faced the better competition. And despite that, his numbers look very, very good given who he's been in the cage with. At this point in his career, he's scored 7 knockdowns. A lot of those are with some nasty inside elbows. He loves to throw those, put people against the cage, and ruin them. He's very, very accurate. He has poor defense. That's his knock. You guys mentioned he is susceptible to body kicks or punches to the body, and Tim Means actually uses twice the normal rate of body shots. So that's a problem. That could come into play here. If we see Tim Means land an early kick to the body, freeze Matt Brown up, he drops his hands, he could be open to something. So that's a red flag. But overall, Matt Brown's wrestling has actually been more to his advantage than a liability. He has been put on his back before, but he's also used it very effectively, and I think it's underrated. So he's the more accurate striker. He's the more powerful striker. He may be a little bit more vulnerable, but round to round, he certainly doesn't lack in aggression. So I think one way or the other, he gets a win here, but I do hold open the possibility that Tim Means could land something brutal early and make it very interesting. And in that fight, he's going to keep pressing. He's not going to go down easy. I do think there's as much excitement as you guys have mentioned that this is probably going to work.
Now, kicking off the pay-per-view main card in the bantamweight division, we have Brad Picket, who is 25-10, taking on Thomas Almeida, who is 18-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Almeida minus 445 to come back on Picket plus 315. And right now, looking over at the line, it's Almeida minus 800. The comeback on Picket is plus 550. So, you know what? I thought, honestly, at this spot, well, I mean, it is what it is, because I figured, honestly, this is a bad matchup, so I'll say that right away for Picket. So I opened Almeida at a fairly high spot, considering Pickett's what he's been throughout his UFC career and what he's accomplished. I mean, he's definitely not an easy out. He made a climb, obviously, towards the bantamweight title a little bit. Never got, towards that upper tier, but he was always in the mix, and a lot of people respected what he was able to accomplish throughout his career and his fighting style, period. I mean, the guy's a well-rounded fighter, and another guy that really, in my opinion, through the years has put a lot of hard work in and got to the point because of work. I don't think a lot of this stuff came natural to Brad Picket. I think it was a lot of hard work put in, and he got himself to the point where he is now a well-rounded, complete fighter that's dangerous pretty much everywhere, that has good wrestling, that has good fight IQ. Just a tough out, and he's faced top level competition, of course, throughout his career as well, and he's done fairly well. Even in his losses, I mean, he's made fights close and he's done awesome. So this is a big test for Almeida. Now, Pickett is moving back up to 135. Almeida's looked amazing so far since his bantamweight debut. I mean, if you really look at it, his fight against Gorman, I mean, that went to the cards. But you know what? A lot of people, that just tells you how tough Gorman is more than anything else, because he was dishing out so much punishment in that spot. A lot of people would have definitely wilted under that pressure and under that just onslaught that Almeida put him under for sure. So you got to credit Gorman for surviving that, but I think a lot of fighters would have been out of there. So, and he was tested there. And why I'm saying that is because Gorman has decent wrestling. I mean, he's the type of guy that's going to come in and look to take the fight to the ground. And if any weakness at all in Almeida's game, I think that's what you would say would be it, because in his stand-up game, I mean, the guy is just a beast on the feet. I mean, he's long. He's very effective with his striking, using his reach well, throwing his hands well, throwing knees good, timing with his kicks, everything about him. He's a southpaw to go along with it. And offensively, he looks phenomenal, honestly. And he's only 23 years old to go along with it. So he's going to keep on improving. Of course, I mean, he's coming in at like 19-0 or something on his resume now. A lot of those fights early on and his career took place in Brazil. And, we see a lot of these Brazilian fighters coming in and with overinflated records, and you're not sure what you're going to get from them. Well, make no mistake. I mean, this guy's legit. He's proven it so far. Again, I know he's only had a couple fights in the UFC, but both of his wins, I think, have been more than impressive. I mean, who's done what he did just now? I mean, I know Eves is getting a little bit older and he's been knocked out. You can say what you will about his chin, but I mean, how good did he really look against Eves in that fight? It was phenomenal what Almeida did to him in just one round. So Almeida is that kind of beast that on the feet he's going to outstrike most. And I think Pickett, if anything, he's shown that defensively he does have a little bit of a weakness. He has been clipped. He's been knocked out in the past, not in the UFC, but in the past he has been knocked out. He's been rocked and actually submitted in the UFC, but so Pickett's shown a pretty tough chin overall, but he is susceptible to getting hit hard and maybe not taking it as well as you'd like to see at times. And against Almeida with the reach advantage, with the skill set that he has on the feet, I think Pickett's in for a very tough night because he's going to have to get this fight to the floor. And Almeida proved thus far that even if you do get him to the ground, you're not going to be able to keep him there and control him that much. So he's going to bounce back up and then he's going to do his thing. So I think regardless of anything, I mean, the line has shifted significantly for Almeida. So maybe there's a little bit too much disrespect right now on Pickett, but at the same time, I really don't see how Brad Pickett's going to win this fight. I think he's going to need to get this fight to the floor, need to maybe, try to smother Almeida with his wrestling and just grind him out and control him, but I just don't see that happening. And I think along the way, what we're going to probably see is Almeida just landing one of those knockout blows and having Pickett officially get knocked out for the first time in his UFC career. I think it's probably how it's going to play out. If it hits the scorecards, then I think what we're going to see is a very tough Brad Pickett hanging in there and just surviving, maybe like Gorman did. But I don't expect this, honestly, to go that long. I think Almeida, fight by fight, he's going to get better. That's the scary thing here for the whole entire division. He's going to get more confidence. Now, again, defensively, Almeida, there is a little bit of concern because he does get tagged. I mean, Gorman was able to do some damage on the feet a little bit with him, but he showed toughness. He showed a good chin, and he just fought through even though he got marked up a little bit. In that fight, it didn't bother him at all, and he was still able to dominate. So I like what I see thus far in Almeida. I think the hype is real, is legit. We're probably going to see this guy competing for the bantamweight title one day. That's how good he is. So I could be wrong here, but I think most of us that have faith and realize that Almeida is the real deal is probably true. So I think it's going to continue here, and he's going to get the biggest win of his UFC career. So my official pick is not a surprise. It's going to be Almeida.
Yeah, I just don't see a lot of good things happening for Brad Pickett here. He's getting up there in years. He has not performed very well as of late. His run at featherweight that he was hoping that he could drop a weight class to a division that he had a win over the champ in Demetrius Johnson, and then maybe have a claim if he won a couple fights to fight for that title. It just didn't go well for him. He didn't look very good at featherweight or at flyweight whatsoever. And I think moving back to bantamweight, the UFC is basically feeding him to Thomas Almeida. This is just chum in the water. Thomas Almeida is an extremely talented striker, very dangerous, very powerful, throws beautiful combinations, and I don't think Brad Picket can hold his own on the feet against this kid whatsoever. Almeida will be the taller fighter, the longer fighter, and the much, much younger and less battle-worn fighter. While Brad Picket has not been officially knocked out in the UFC, he has been hurt multiple times, and it's been happening more and more as of late. And I think against Almeida, I think he does get knocked out for the first time in his UFC career, at least. The big advantage Picket possibly has is the ground game. He does have a very solid, underrated grappling ability, and his wrestling is not half bad. That's actually how he was able to win his flyweight debut against Neil Siri, who is also competing on this card. And Siri's a very underrated fighter. So if Picket has an opportunity to win this fight, he needs to use that offensive wrestling and just keep Almeida on his back repeatedly for 15 straight minutes and maybe even pull off a submission. But he can't do it haphazardly like he did in the Michael McDonald fight, where he walked right into a triangle choke with his offensive wrestling. So he needs to, set up the takedowns and not just dive into him. And I just don't know if he has enough left in the tank to actually do this. So against a guy like Almeida, who, as Nick mentioned, could be fighting for a title someday, and I 100% agree, this kid is loaded with talent, I just don't see Brad Picket hanging in a firefight, and he loves to brawl, and I think it's starting to show its signs. And while, again, he hasn't been knocked out yet, it's going to happen. It always happens as fighters get older. That chin just finally gives up, and this could finally be the fight where that chin goes. And I just think Thomas Almeida is the real deal. And while Almeida doesn't have the greatest defensive striking, I think Brad Picket just does not have the power or the ability to hurt him enough to punish him for some of his flaws with his striking defense. So this is Thomas Almeida's fight to lose, and I think that he wins convincingly. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Gunnar Nelson, who is 13-1-1, taking on Brandon Thatch, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Another great fight. I opened Thatch minus 160, the comeback on Nelson plus 120. Right now, over at 5 dimes, it is Thatch minus 170. The comeback on Nelson is plus 150. So a little bit more action coming in Thatch's way, but there have been balanced as far as 5 dimes goes, because there has been a lot of people coming in on Nelson as well. So it's not too much of a need for them, but they definitely are leaning a little bit more towards Nelson as far as the betting window goes, because I think we're going to continue to see a little bit more action coming on Thatch. But again, awesome fight. One that's definitely a head scratcher because the way these guys match up. I mean, Nelson, of course, is well respected and well known for his ground game. I mean, the guy has phenomenal BJJ to say the least. But the problem with Nelson is I think on the ground, he lacks a little bit of the wrestling to get the fight to the ground against high level guys that are able to sprawl and brawl on him. And then his striking, I mean, overall, Nelson has that kind of like almost weird karate type of style on the feet, which can be effective at times too. But against Thatch, I don't know. I don't think that's going to be the way to go, because Thatch should be the more effective and the more dangerous striker of the two. And Thatch does have, I mean, just his physical size is hard to deal with. He's going to be bigger, stronger than Nelson for sure, in this spot a little bit longer. And then Thatch, obviously against, I know that Ben Henderson was moving up from 155 to take that fight at 170 against Thatch in his last fight, but Bendo's a pretty strong guy, even at 170, I mean, he's going to have some strength. He's going to have the ability to take the fight to the floor. And Thatch was actually ragdolling Bendo for a while, and his aggressiveness had, honestly, Ben Henderson just, on his heels really moving back quite often in that fight until Thatch finally started getting a little bit tired and Ben Henderson started being a little bit more effective. This is a 3-round fight. It's not a 5-round fight. So there was a lot of question marks with me and Thatch as far as his conditioning, his cardio, because we all knew what he's capable of doing in the first round. But that's the problem with Thatch. all of his finishes, I don't know if that's a problem for him, but I'm saying all of his finishes were in the first round. I mean, all the way dating back, I think, to a second fight ever, which was a close decision loss. He's finished everybody in the first round besides Ben Henderson. So there was a lot of question marks. Can Thatch go 3, 4, 5 rounds strong? He answered a lot of those questions, in my opinion, against Ben Henderson, and he could go. Now, he did start fading there towards round 3 and round 4, and ultimately he lost in the 4th round to Ben Henderson, and that was one of the reasons. But questions did get answered. Can he go 3 strong? I think he really can. I know this is going to be a tough fight for him because Nelson's going to be probably pushing forward at some point or looking to take this fight to the floor, and that's going to have to sprawl and brawl a little bit. But man, he's so dangerous. I mean, his clinch game could be very effective, so Nelson has to be careful when looking to take this fight to the floor because Thatch can end things with just one knee, one punch, one elbow, one kick, any which way. I mean, he just has so much power and so much aggression and so much skill to finish a fight on the feet that Nelson is going to be in danger the whole time. Now, that being said, if Nelson can get the fight to the floor, Thatch is in some serious trouble because Nelson is just so above and beyond the level of Thatch on the ground. Thatch is decent. He can hold his own against some people, but I think he's definitely outclassed here against Nelson on the ground. And you can't count out Nelson striking. Like I said, he does have that karate type of style, but he's a little bit too inactive at times for me. And if he does that against Thatch, Thatch is going to push a higher pace on the feet, and he's going to be the more dangerous fighter. So Nelson definitely needs to get this fight to the floor. If he does, he can obviously win this fight. And I think he can, and he will win this fight if he hits the floor. But the problem is, I think Thatch will probably have enough takedown defense to keep this fight upright. If the fight does hit the floor, Thatch might be on top of Nelson, which he still has to be careful because Nelson, even off his back, is very dangerous. But I think Thatch can maintain and do a little bit more damage if he does get on top. But I think more so than not, Thatch is a pretty smart fighter. He's going to try to keep this fight upright. He's going to try to just land those devastating knees, punches, elbows, and get Nelson out of there. So, again, another case of what have you done for me lately? I know both of these guys are coming off losses, but I was more impressed in Thatch's performance against a real deal fighter than compared to, honestly, Nelson's performance against the toughest fight of his life. So that being said, I got to side a little bit more with Thatch. It is an interesting fight. I mean, this last minute opponent change at least made this matchup possible. Both these guys should be in fairly decent shape, of course. So that shouldn't have too much of an impact, but a tough fight to pick, but I am leaning towards Thatch. I think he probably will win this fight.
Yeah, this fight is really tricky to me because mainly it's a grappler versus striker matchup. Yeah, Gunnar Nelson can stand. He's got a little bit of a karate background, but I don't think that against a guy like Brandon Thatch, who's going to be a lot bigger, longer, taller than Nelson and knows how to use it, that Nelson really should be screwing around too much on the feet. Now, in terms of the ground game, Gunnar Nelson is absolutely phenomenal. One of the best ground games in all of MMA. It's just, how is he going to get Brandon Thatch to the ground? He doesn't really have amazing wrestling, and that's really been Brandon Thatch's weakness throughout his career. And in terms of conditioning, yeah, Thatch slowed down in the 4th round against Benson Henderson and maybe the end of the 3rd, but for 2.5 rounds, he was phenomenal. He was outworking Bendo. He was landing big shots. And with this fight being a 3-round fight, I think it's much less likely that Thatch gasses. So the threat of Thatch slowing down and Gunnar Nelson taking advantage late is not nearly as much. So in this fight, it's really going to boil down to, can Gunnar Nelson close the distance? Can he get Thatch to the ground? And of course, if he can get into the ground, I think he's in terrific shape because if Benson Henderson can tap out Thatch, I guarantee Gunnar Nelson can. Because I think Nelson actually has a much better ground game even than Bendo. So here, what really stands out is, will Nelson be able to get to the ground? And I'm just not sure he's going to be able to, because Thatch is long. If he keeps Nelson at the end of his punches, it's going to be very difficult. Nelson's going to have to telegraph a lot of his takedown attempts. I don't think he's going to be able to get inside very easily. And if he does, Thatch will probably punish him with some nasty elbows and knees. So, man, I just think this is a terrible nightmare type of matchup for Gunnar Nelson, and I actually expect Brandon Thatch to go out there and maybe force Gunnar to want to drop down a weight class. He's going to use that size to his advantage, use that power, and definitely put some hurt on Gunnar Nelson. So I like Brandon Thatch here. I think he picks up the win. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, generally they're in agreement. I mean, Thatch's knockdowns in his first few fights were ridiculous. The guy is crazy violent. He was putting people away and making it look easy. And then all of a sudden he runs into Benson Henderson and it's a completely different ballgame. We have a seasoned striking veteran in Henderson. He knows how to stay out of trouble. I think Thatch was doing well. He was landing the more damaging strikes in that fight. But there were a lot of takedowns, both sides. In fact, Thatch actually landed a couple takedowns on Henderson, which is surprising. So that fight really skews what we think of Brandon Thatch. He is definitely susceptible on the ground. And Brian, as you mentioned, if Henderson can tap Thatch, Gunnar Nelson is certainly equipped to do so as well. The problem with Gunnar Nelson is just his style. He is not in a hurry anytime he fights. In fact, he has the lowest striking output I think I've ever seen in the UFC of a guy that actually has a few fights. He uses a very laid-back karate-style wide base, switches stance a lot, but just in terms of pulling the trigger, you almost don't see it. He is very accurate, but he's hard to catch, hard to fight. He got dropped against Rick Story, so we know that can happen. This is a guy who just hadn't lost ever until he ran into Rick Story, and so I think our perception of him is now changing. So we have this two golden boys really that finally ran into someone, but I think here it's just all about styles. Can Nelson get it to the ground? And honestly, with his aggression, I don't think it happens. I mean, I think maybe if it's a slow enough fight, he gets some time against the cage, then he could get it down. Brandon Thatch knows this. He is the far more aggressive striker, much more powerful, more evasive. He's got accuracy. I mean, he is skilled all around as a striker in terms of aggression, where Nelson is more of a technician, but you just can't rely on that in the welterweight division in the UFC. You know, maybe Machida got by for a few years because he was putting people away with one kick. Gunnar Nelson isn't doing that. So total styles mismatch here. I do see some finishing potential, submissions from Nelson, potential knockout from Thatch. Thatch is certainly able to hit Nelson a lot harder than Rick Story did. So he could put him away, but this is a head scratcher of a matchup. I mean, I slightly lean Thatch here, because I think he should have the takedown defense, or he should at least know to keep his distance. And Nelson's going to have trouble setting up those takedowns, and he might get tagged. So slight lean towards Thatch, especially since it's a 3-rounder. If it was longer, maybe Thatch gets tired like he did against Henderson, and maybe it's easier to wrestle him and get him submitted. But only a slight lean here because there is a lot of unknowns, and I think, we'll learn a lot more about both these guys after this matchup.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Dennis Bermudez, who is 15-4, taking on Jeremy Stevens, who is 23-11. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Bermudez opens -190. The comeback on Stevens +150. And right now, Bermudez is -200. The comeback on Stevens is +170. So a little bit more action coming in on Bermudez. The line margins tighten up again here. Line has been out for a little bit now, and it looks like across the board, it's about 190, 200, looking at the down best screen as well at most sports books. So everybody's pretty much in agreement. This is going to be an outstanding fight because, obviously, Bermudez went on that incredible run towards a title shot. It kind of got derailed there by Lamas, obviously, in his last fight. But before that, he was just really impressive what he was able to accomplish. But if you look a little bit closer, he had a couple controversial decisions in there. He had some good performances in there for sure. I just think that there's a little bit, and it's maybe unfair to say, but a little bit too much hype around Bermudez. But for his skill set, the guy is a very talented fighter. He's an explosive wrestler, has some speed and power on the feet. He's got good boxing. And again, his wrestling is definitely, top level. He's able to in most cases, dictate and control the pace of the fight, basically able to get the fight where he wants it and able to be effective. And people have a lot of problems, stopping Bermudez and stuffing his takedowns and even on the feet a little bit. Bermudez does tend to outstrike a lot of people as well. But the problem with Bermudez also on the feet is that he does have a suspect chin. The guy has never been officially knocked out in his UFC career, but man, has he been tagged and rocked and dropped. Now, you got to credit him for recovering and being able to finish fights, and most of those fights coming back and winning. But, if you look at his last fight against Lamas, he got dropped by a jab and then got choked out quickly thereafter because of that jab that he got knocked out. And that's not really a good thing. That's not what you like to see. And again, it's not just the Lamas fight. looking back at several fights along the way, Bermudez has been tagged and rocked and been in some problems. So he's fighting a guy here that arguably hits just as hard as anybody he's faced, if not the hardest puncher he's faced, striker he's faced, is Stevens. I mean, Stevens has looked outstanding since he dropped down to 145 in his own right. I know he's coming off, again, some back-to-back losses against quality competition, so you got to give him the benefit of that out there as well. Stevens working extremely hard, working on that takedown defense, because he knows people are going to come in and looking to wrestle him, take him down, because they're not going to want to stand and bang with him too often because of how much knockout power he does have. I mean, Stevens, obviously, he can knock you out with head kick. He can knock you out with either hand. He's got good knees in the clinch. He's got good elbows as well. If you're trying to pin him up against the cage, he starts unloading elbows on you. Stevens just has knockout power everywhere. So he's a very dangerous fighter. So that's why his takedown defense is actually improving, and it's gotten better. I know in his last fight against Oliveira, he was in, some problems on the ground there with Oliveira, but Oliveira pulled guard a little bit. He had some trick takedowns. I mean, he got the fight to the floor, which was impressive for Oliveira, to be honest with you. But one of the most impressive things about that fight to me was, I don't know how Stevens was able to stay out of some of those submissions. I mean, he was in some really bad spots there, but he had the toughness and I guess the skill to get out of him. I mean, a few of those it looked like he was caught and he was done. But that being said, he got out of him and he managed to finish the fight, and it made it at least interesting and competitive. But the ground is what lost him the fight. And I think that Bermudez is going to have to kind of implement that same game plan. He's going to have to try to come in, take this fight to the floor, make it an ugly fight. He's going to obviously have to work his striking a little bit before he gets inside and closes the gap to try to take Stevens down. And that's what might get him into trouble here, because Stevens is going to be taller. He's going to have a big reach advantage over Bermudez as well. And again, he's got all that power. So he's the knockout striker. Bermudez is okaying on the feet, but I think that's where he's going to have a little bit of a speed advantage, but that's where it kind of stops. I think Stevens is definitely the better striker in this spot, and he's going to give Bermudez all sorts of problems. So I'm actually leaning towards Stevens here, because I think Bermudez is going to eventually get caught, and he will get his official, I think, first knockout eventually, and it could be against a fighter like Stevens for sure, because if Lamas was able to drop him with a jab, just imagine what Stevens is going to do to him with any hand or a foot, again, that lands or hits Bermudez. No disrespect intended for Bermudez, but I just don't trust that chin enough. As far as cardio goes, though, I do give a slight edge to Bermudez, of course, because Stevens does tend to slow down. I know he went 5 rounds against Swanson not long ago, but in that fight with Oliveira, he was definitely breathing heavy and he was tired. With having to defend all those subs and the ground game that he worked. So Bermudez could make him work and could wear him out a little bit, maybe steals us on the cards, but I think there's a good chance that if it does hit the scorecards, again, it's another competitive toss-up type of fight. If it doesn't hit the scorecards, I think it's actually going to be Stevens finishing Bermudez. So I'm going to have to go with the underdog here and pick Jeremy Stevens to pull off the upset win over Bermudez.
Dennis Bermudez is a very dangerous fighter. I mean, he went on that vicious win streak through the division for a reason, but man, I think he got exposed a little bit in that last fight against Ricardo Lamas because, Bermudez has that ability to push a high pace, to take guys down, to beat on them, to just completely wear you down with just an onslaught of ground and pound, takedowns, and pressure. But once he starts facing those higher level guys that can maybe stuff those takedowns and force him into situations that he doesn't want to be, he gets in trouble. I mean, against Lamas, he got dropped by a jab. And against Jeremy Stevens, like this guy, if he hits you with a full-on shot, I think Dennis Bermudez could go out cold. Bermudez does not have a very good chin, so that is very scary going in there against a guy in Stevens who might be one of the most powerful featherweights in the entire roster. Stevens is a very, very dangerous fighter, and that's just something that you have to consider. And his takedown defense is pretty good. He's a decent wrestler in his own right, and you saw it in the Darren Elkins fight, which is a similar fight to this, although Bermudez is a little bit more explosive and powerful than Elkins. But in that fight, Stevens was able to stuff every takedown and just punish Elkins with strikes, and I think that is something that could happen here. Now, yes, Bermudez probably will be able to set those takedowns up a little bit better. I think that he could duck under and maybe drop Stevens down a couple times with some good takedowns, but I expect Stevens to not stay on his back for long, work back to his feet, and just get right back to striking. And I think while Bermudez does push that high pace, man, I don't think that he can stand and trade with Jeremy Stevens for very long. That's just not his game. And if he's forced to do it, I think Stevens drops him. Now, Bermudez does recover very quickly from getting hurt, but if Stevens can keep that pressure on, and if he smells blood, I think Stephens can put him out. And overall, I do think that there's a decent chance that Bermudez could still eke out a decision if this does go the distance, but there's a good possibility that Jeremy Stephens wins by TKO at some point in this fight. That threat will be there from start to finish. Jeremy Stephens is known for losing a round or two and then coming back strong. You saw it multiple times throughout his career. The most notable one, obviously, against the current lightweight champ, Rafael dos Anjos. But this is something that's always going to be there, so in his back pocket. And so Bermudez is going to have to be very vigilant. And I just don't think he is, because his striking defense is not good whatsoever. So I expect Jeremy Stephens to catch him at some point in this fight and probably put him out. So my pick is Jeremy Stephens. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I love this matchup also. And Jeremy Stephens definitely does have potential for a knockout here. That prop, by the way, is currently running plus 390. That's pretty juicy. So Jeremy Stephens, in terms of accuracy, these guys are very similar. But there's a big difference offensively. The power of Stephens, he has 8 knockdowns, a knockdown rate that is much higher than average and than Bermudez, whereas Bermudez is more of a volume guy. He tends to press forward often because he's setting up takedowns. I mean, let's be honest. This guy's wrestling stats are phenomenal. That's how he wins fights. But when he just stands and trades and doesn't mix in the takedowns, then he could be in trouble. And this is perfect for Jeremy Stephens. He has faced plenty of takedowns in his career so far. He knows that's probably Bermudez's plan here. But Jeremy Stephens will find the chin at some point, because Dennis Bermudez, as you guys mentioned, his striking defense isn't quite there. And again, that might be stylistic. It's because he is going for takedowns, and you got to drop your hands at some point for that. But he has been hit on the chin quite a bit, and more so than he lands on his own opponents. So factor in a 5-inch reach differential that favors Jeremy Stephens. He should be able to land some hard shots. And Dennis Bermudez, at this point, having been dropped 4 times now, which is more than anyone on the card, he has the worst chin rating of anyone on the card. So that, these are real red flags here, for Dennis Bermudez to be such a big favorite when there is, a clear path to victory for Jeremy Stephens. So, if we see the opposite, if we see Bermudez land the early takedowns, grind him down, practice a safe style fight, he could grind out the decision. That's probably the most likely way he wins. But he's gonna have to be very careful, and there is a real chance that he gets upset here.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving up to the welterweight division for a title fight, we have the champion Robbie Lawler, who is 25-10 with 1 no contest, taking on Rory McDonald, who is 18-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened McDonald minus 140. The comeback on Lawler, even money. And right now, McDonald is minus 175. The comeback on Lawler is plus 155. So more support coming in on Rory. And the line actually crept up over 2-1. And Lawler was as high as almost plus 200 at one point. I think it was around plus 190-ish or so. So a lot of early action definitely coming in Rory's way. And you know what? It's a little bit surprising, because Lawler's obviously the champion. What he's accomplished in his career, especially recently, has been phenomenal. I mean, he's made a heck of a run, heck of a return to the UFC. He's put in, again, another case where the guy has been working. He's put the work in the gym, and has really shown in the octagon. I mean, the level of competition that Lawler has faced since his return to the UFC has been pretty solid overall. And he's faced, obviously, Rory McDonald in that run as well, and he had a very close split decision win. I actually bet Lawler in the first time that they fought, because I thought there was outstanding value. The way they matched up, I knew it was going to be a difficult fight for Rory, but that line was way different. I mean, Rory was a pretty big favorite in that fight. Now, this time around, the line margin's a little bit tighter, but still, I think when it crept up over, depending on the spot of this fight, is where you're going to find value, I think, because you don't want to lay too much juice, honestly, on Rory, and you don't want to obviously take a bad spot with Lawler either, because why I'm saying all this is because I do think that Rory is the more talented and the better fighter. Again, he's in another spot where he's a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, especially in fight years as well, even though he's been through some wars and he's been clipped and he's been, in some serious fights. I still think that Lawler throughout his career has definitely, taken a lot more punishment, and in fight years, he's a little bit older as well. And I mean, look at that run, honestly, that Lawler has had recently. I mean, last year, even up to the Hendricks fight. I mean, he was fighting pretty often. I mean, he was in there climbing his way back towards the Johnny Hendricks title shot after his first loss, after the first time they fought, and it was a very competitive type of decision. So the guy's been putting in the work. He's been improving every time. He's got good – the thing with Lawler is he's got good takedown defense, and he's always had good wrestling, underrated wrestling. And then, of course, I mean, he's one of the most explosive and powerful fighters on the feet, no doubt about it. I mean, he's got knockout power again. We were just talking, obviously, about Jeremy Stevens. I mean, you could say a lot of those same things with probably Lawler, and more so because Lawler is such a dangerous fighter. He's a southpaw on the feet. He hits like a truck. I mean, the guy is very smart as far as fight IQ goes because he's been in the sport for so long, training with so many great individuals throughout his career. So he's not an easy out. I mean, in this first fight, he had success against Rory because he honestly landed the more significant blows. I mean, he was landing the harder shots. McDonald was rocked. McDonald was actually almost put out in that fight. Both of those guys were actually tired as the fight was kind of winding down there. And I think we're going to see another very close competitive fight between these two. I think Lawler's best shot is honestly, I mean, it could hit the scorecards and be very competitive, but I think Lawler, his best shot to win this fight now would be to honestly knock out Rory and just put him out there and finish the fight. For Rory, I think he can win on the cards, and I think he's really improved because I think his confidence level, I mean, since his fight, honestly, to Jake Ellenberger, a lot of people were disappointed with how inactive McDonald was, but he bounced back after that, and he's had some really successful fights. Against Woodley, I think was one of his best performances. I mean, he just dominated a very game opponent in Tyron Woodley in that fight. Just, I mean, from the opening bell. So not too many people can do that. So that, I think it kind of just woke Rory up a little bit. And I think that, he's kind of coming into his own. So this is Rory McDonald kind of reaching the peak of his career. He's got the confidence. He's got the mental aspect down. Of course, he trains with TriStar, former UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre, which never hurts because St. Pierre was obviously one of the best ever, in our sport. So, I mean, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. He's been putting in the work as well. And I think on the feet, it's going to be interesting. That's where it's definitely going to be interesting because both these guys can definitely score and land. Obviously, Lawler, I think, is going to be the more effective striker and the more powerful striker, but you can't take away from what Rory brings to the table, and he's a very intelligent fighter. He's got a little bit of reach over Lawler as well, and he's able to land frequent when he wants to push that kind of pace. But his real advantage definitely lies on the ground here as well. His wrestling has always been a tad underrated. He's going to be able, I think, to mix in, even if they're quick, short type of takedowns, he's going to be able to mix in the grappling a little bit here. Even if he gets Lawler up against a cage, he gets him down for a second, even Lawler bounces back up. So he's going to be able to steal, I think, some rounds and some points that way as well. And he could also, obviously, McDonald on the ground is very underrated as well as far as submission game goes. So he could, even though Lawler's sub defenses look a lot better and he's much better on the ground, he's still susceptible to being choked and being caught in a sub. So that is a path of victory there for McDonald as well as I think on the scorecards. And you can't count Rory out on the feet either. So he's got several ways to win this fight where I think Lawler, honestly, again, he can win by knockout and another maybe competitive type of war decision that he can win on the cards as well. So this is not an easy fight to pick. But from a pure pick perspective, I'm going to have to lean with Rory McDonald to get the W here.
Yeah, this fight's wild. I mean, they've already fought before. We already know this, and Robbie Lawler was able to eke out the decision victory. But, man, that fight was close. Rory was winning the fight. He was doing good. He was getting takedowns. He was landing good jabs. He just ran out of steam a little bit, and then Robbie was able to come on strong late despite both men being really tired and drop Rory late in the fight. So I think this time around, Rory's been working very hard, diligently to fix some of those issues. He has been criticized in the past for just being way too jab reliant and just outpointing opponents, and then he goes out there against Tarek Sapedine and just blisters him. So I think that he has listened to some of that criticism, and he's been going out there a little bit harder, a little bit stronger, and this time around he is insanely motivated. I mean, the title's on the line, it's everything for him. In terms of pure skills, I think Rory McDonald is one of the best purely skilled fighters on the entire UFC roster. The guy is crazy big for the division, really long reach, uses it well, has a great jab, And then to top it all off, he has solid wrestling and a very, very dangerous ground game in terms of submissions and ground and pound. So this is a guy that really does have the total package. Now, the thing that has been an issue for McDonald is he slows down in fights. That's how he lost against Lawler. It's how he lost against Carlos Condit in both of his career losses. So he's going to have to make sure to make that adjustment, pace himself, because this is a 5-round fight. And if he starts to slow down in the 3rd round against Lawler, he is in big, big trouble. Now, in looking at Lawler, he has looked phenomenal since coming back to the UFC, dropping back down to the welterweight division. He puts a ton of pressure on his opponents. He still has those extremely heavy hands, and he can hit you with both of them. He can knock you out, and honestly, he's fighting the best he's ever fought in his entire career. Now, that being said, his 2 title fights against Johnny Hendricks were a little bit iffy. I mean, the first one went all the way to the 5th round where it came down to that, and he just lost the 5th round. It was fair and square. His last fight, when he actually won the title from Hendricks, I thought he looked worse than he did in the first fight, but he was able to eke out the decision. I don't know if he actually deserved it, but he did win that decision. So I'm really not 100% convinced that, he should have a ton of confidence heading into this fight, even though he does have the win against McDonald in the past, and even though he is coming off of a title victory. I don't know what kind of momentum he actually really has. So Rory is fighting incredibly well right now. He's extremely dangerous, and I think that he's going to be putting that jab in Robbie's face and really flustering him this time around. And I think that if he can force Lawler to make some mistakes and maybe expose himself a little bit while trying to be a little over-aggressive, I think Rory can punish him, and I expect Rory McDonald to win this fight. The only thing that concerns me is if he starts to slow down again, and Robbie Lawler could take over and potentially finish him late in the fight. But my pick is going to be Rory McDonald. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Yeah, Robbie Lawler he's a guy that's evolved his career over the years. And first of all, he was fighting in different weight classes and in different organizations, but we have a lot of data on this guy. And he really has stepped up his game recently. Here he is, a grizzled veteran of the sport, yet he's only 33. It seems like he's been around a lot longer. Rory McDonald seems like he's been around a while too, and yet he's only 26. I mean, this guy has been getting it done in the UFC at a high level since he was barely 21 years old, which is remarkable. So these guys are in very different career paths. McDonald was a golden boy. He was the next in line after GSP. In fact, when he first fought Robbie Lawler, if he won, GSP was going to retire. The throne was going to switch over but stay at TriStar. And Rory McDonald was going to get the next shot, and he screwed that up. 3rd round, he was just ahead on the cards going in. I think towards the end of that round, he gets dropped and he loses that round, split decision. So that has got to hurt. That loss cost him dearly in terms of his career. So now he's finally back. He's fighting the exact same guy, but this time it's for a title. So these guys should be very, very motivated. Both guys very good offensively. You've pointed out some of the differences. Robbie Lawler is going to be more powerful, 10 career knockdowns, very high knockdown rate. We don't normally see him get hurt. Rory McDonald, not a power guy, only 1 knockdown scored, although I think that was an emphatic one against Tarek Saffiedine, who's a great striker in his own right. But McDonald is more about the aggressive game, controlling the cage. He beats people up. He has an unbelievably fast jab that lands at very high accuracy, and he's very hard to hit. His defense is very good, even while he's pushing forward. So you can't just back up and try to counter him. He is going to pick you apart. He has one of the longest reaches in the division. He only has a slight reach advantage over Lawler because Lawler's also pretty rangy. But McDonald is very good at using that range. So he does actually use quite a bit of jabs. People do knock him for that, but it works. His jab is very, very accurate, whereas Lawler uses few jabs. He's swinging for the fences, and that costs him on volume. So round to round, I think we all agree McDonald is probably going to be scoring more points because he's going to be the busier fighter and probably hit less. than Robbie Lawler, and McDonald does have the wrestling game. He has a very stifling ground game. You're probably not going to take him down. He's going to be the more likely fighter going for takedowns here against Lawler for sure. The question is, how long can Lawler compete with that? He did get taken down a few times in their first fight. But generally speaking, he is hard to get down. He's just a fast guy. He bounces up quickly. And yeah, I think back to when he fought Tim Kennedy at 185 in middleweight. So Lawler was really hard to drag down, and that was a tough, grueling fight. So anyway, I love this matchup. This is one of those, just stay on the edge of your seat, appreciate it for the technical spectacle that it is. But I think Rory McDonald ekes it out. I think it goes to the championship rounds. The best way that Lawler can win is to catch Rory coming forward and to put him on his ass. But that's asking a lot, because Rory continues to get better. He was a younger fighter, less experienced guy when they fought the first time. And full disclosure, Rory is a client, so I am a little bit biased here. So this is not one that I feel very confident about, because I think it should be a closely contested fight. But overall, at least, the numbers do slightly favor Rory.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening. First off, the UFC featherweight title is on the line. Give us the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on Mendes versus McGregor for an interim title fight on short notice.
I opened Mendes minus 130, the comeback on McGregor, even money. And right now it's actually minus 115, but it is minus 130 now at some spots as well. So at 5 dimes is a pick 'em at Bookmaker and DSI right now. It's back to minus 130 for Chad Mendes. Definitely a tough fight, and honestly a very tough line for me to set as well, because I could make a case, and originally my first thought was making Conor McGregor as a slight favorite, because of all the action that we've seen against McGregor and Aldo, everybody coming in on McGregor. Now again, remember, it was actually a lot of that action was coming in before the rib injury. Since the rib injury, with Aldo McGregor, obviously the line flipped, and I forgot to mention, I believe in the last part when we did Aldo McGregor breakdown, but right now it's McGregor minus 150, Aldo plus 130, but it was still leaning close to a pick. And then some action actually in Vegas was, some spots had McGregor favored anyway before the injury. So with all that support coming in against the champion and Jose Aldo, with a short notice fight coming into play here as well, with Mendes only getting a couple weeks to actually prepare, you can make a case for Conor McGregor actually being favored over Chad Mendes. But all that being said, it's tough, because if you look back, I mean, stylistically, and a lot of people have a good opinion on this fight about stylistic matchups or where it's at here. And if you look at it, I mean, McGregor has not faced a wrestler to the extent of Chad Mendes throughout his whole career. And the problem with McGregor is, if you look back, and you know what, I did go back and look at his fights, his losses, because, I mean, look, what he's done in the UFC, he's accomplished a lot of good things. But again, as Reed mentioned, I mean, McGregor hasn't really been tested on the ground. He's almost only had to stuff like 5 takedown attempts completely. So you got to date back all the way to his Cage Warriors fight in 2010 with Joseph Duffy. So if you go back, and that video is available online out there, so you guys can look it up and check it out. But Duffy's able to, I mean, McGregor was looking good in that fight, but one mistake, Duffy shot underneath, got a quick little takedown, a single leg, and then just dominated that fight. He got positional control, and it was over fast once Duffy got the fight to the floor. So watching that, and even though it's all the way back in 2010, and I know McGregor has improved greatly since then. I mean, his training, everything about it. So he's got better takedown defense. He's got better fight IQ. He's just the better fighter, since that point. But it's still in the back of my mind, and he hasn't really faced, again, a guy like Chad Mendes. I mean, Mendes is a very talented wrestler, one of the best wrestlers you can argue in the entire UFC, let alone the featherweight division. I mean, the guy's explosive. He's fast. He's got a good fight IQ. And not to mention, I mean, what Mendes is able to do on the feet. So with all that being said, and again, I mean, obviously the popular opinion out there, they're split. A lot of people that are going to support McGregor, regardless who he fights, they're going to support McGregor. But I think a lot of the logical people, the way that people are looking at this thing, is that Mendes should have a slight advantage, because he does have the overall better game with his wrestling. He could be controlling in the tempo of the fight. And that's why I opened Mendes a little bit of a slight favorite here. Again, he would actually open a little bit higher if he had a full training camp against McGregor, of course. But that being said, again, the action is coming in on McGregor. It did they were getting two-way action. A little bit of action early on did come in on Mendes, but since then there's been more action on McGregor, and it looks like the line could possibly flip. Again, I wouldn't be surprised to see McGregor coming in as a favorite by close time against, even if Mendes does step in there and take that fight. So nothing set in stone, obviously, with Mendes McGregor, but I think it is a possibility. And if it does go down, man, I mean, we can't count out, again, Mendes even on the feet. McGregor has, obviously, I think he's going to be the longer fighter. He's going to have a big reach advantage over Mendes, of course, and he's got a lot of power. And we were able to see what Jose Aldo was able to do when he landed on Mendes. He was able to hurt him and, rock him several times throughout that fight. But Mendes showed a lot of toughness there. I mean, he didn't quit. Again, he recovered fairly well, and he was right back in the fight doing what he does best, and he made that fight really competitive against Jose Aldo. So here against McGregor, with all the question marks around him, I think Mendes actually is a bad stylistic matchup for McGregor. So I'm going to go on a limb and pick Mendes here, even though the short notice does bother me a little bit, because if McGregor does not get taken down in the first round and he's able to get this fight in round 2, round 3, round 4, we could see Mendes. I mean, he's always the type of guy that seems like he's in shape. He's a very intelligent fighter, so I think he's going to be in decent shape. But still, short notice. When you're training for a camp and you're serious and you're focused on a camp for 8 weeks, that's the average, fight camp for a professional fighter, it seems like these days. There's a difference of having a 2-week camp and an 8-week camp. So I think even though Mendes is typically in pretty good shape, there's still a little bit of a concern there because he could slow down as the fight goes. So that's my biggest concern here, but I think it's not going to take long. If Mendes is able to get McGregor to the floor, I think he's smart enough that he's going to hop on his back and sink in that rear naked choke and end it fairly quickly. Now, another thing you got to consider is out there that Mendes has done several interviews. He knows that there's a good possibility he's going to step in and obviously take this fight as well if Aldo does in fact pull out. And he said he has a good game plan in place. I mean, game plans, you could throw it all out the window once a fighter gets hit. We all know that. But still, fight IQ is very important in the fight game. And Mendes, that's what I like about Mendes as well, is he knows what he has to do here. He knows he can't really mess around and take the risk of striking with a longer, powerful fighter like McGregor on the feet. Even though I think Mendes can hang. I'm not saying he can't hang on the feet. I just think that the easiest path to victory for Mendes is trying to look and hunt for that takedown. And then once the fight gets there, it might not last long because I think Mendes could finish him fairly quickly if he's able to get the fight to the ground. So with all that being said, I do favor, if it is a stand-up affair between McGregor and Mendes, McGregor's probably going to win that, but I don't think it's going to be. I do think that wrestling will come into play here. I think that Mendes is the better submission fighter on the ground, obviously, and he's just got such a big advantage, and I like his fight IQ to go along with it. So stylistically, I do favor Mendes in the fight. So my official pick, if it happens, would be Mendes over McGregor.
I just think the way these guys would match up is McGregor's takedown defense being exposed here. I mean, you have to look at it. The UFC has protected him a little bit. He hasn't been thrown in there against anybody that's got tremendous wrestling, anybody that would be looking to take him down as their primary game plan. He's been thrown in there against guys that didn't have great takedown or striking defense and wanted to stand and bang for the most part. And with McGregor against Mendes, hypothetically, I just think Mendes would be able to shoot in. He has extremely explosive takedowns, and I think he could get on top of McGregor and punish him with strikes on the ground and potentially submit him or knock him out there. Now, the other factor that you have to have is, while Mendes does have amazing wrestling, his stand-up has come so far. He is now a legitimate threat to knock anybody out in the division, including Jose Aldo, who he dropped in their last fight. Mendes, in his last fight against Ricardo Lamas, just proved that he was the top dog that wasn't Jose Aldo by absolutely obliterating a guy that had beat everybody else on the division. So Mendes is absolutely a stud at featherweight, and he would be champion if Jose Aldo wasn't there. So I think against McGregor, he would have the huge threat of the takedown, and then on the feet, he'd be able to hold his own, and especially just because of the threat of the takedown, McGregor would be a little paralyzed. He wouldn't be able to open up like he likes to, because he knows that if he does, Mendes would be able to shoot in and put him on his back. So that would actually allow Mendes, who has already got excellent striking, an even bigger advantage even on the feet. Now, the big equalizer here is chin strength. We really haven't seen Conor McGregor's chin tested enough yet. He's taken a couple shots, but nothing real crazy. And we have seen Chad Mendes get hurt. He's been dropped and knocked out by Jose Aldo the first time they fought, and then the last time he got put on his butt a couple times by some big shots from Aldo. So we do know that there's potential for a knockout if McGregor's able to open up and land something good. So overall, if it does stay standing, McGregor has a shot to put him out. They both probably have about equal power, although Mendes, we know this guy has legitimate knockout power. He knocks out people that other people haven't been able to knock out. So that is something that you have to keep an eye on. But if it does stay standing, McGregor does have a chance, especially with that long, lanky reach of his. But the fact that Mendes can mix in that wrestling, that great team alpha male, full mixed martial arts attack, I think you have to favor Mendes, so I would pick Mendes. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's hard to predict how a complete stylistic mismatch can really play out. And this is the story for several matchups on this card, regardless of whether we see Mendes actually come in. And if we do, that's how the night's going to end. We've got pure wrestler. When he wrestles, he is very, very effective. He is dominant. Chad Mendes only runs into trouble when he can't land those takedowns. So against Jose Aldo in both fights, as a matter of fact, he only landed one total takedown, and that was on 15 attempts. Now, every other fight, every other guy, he's landed 37 takedowns on 55 attempts for a success rate that is way above average. So basically, he dominates everybody else other than Jose Aldo. So what is going on here? Jose Aldo knows how to keep his distance. He's an excellent striker. He's got great balance. Even when you've got a leg, he's hopping around. He stays on his feet. He bounces right back up. Very hard to pin down. So far, we haven't seen McGregor taken down, but we have seen some of that balance. This is a guy who trains a lot of exercises in balance and things like that. So, he might be well equipped for this, and that might be the card that he's holding in his back pocket, is that he has been training for this day for when he finally does get put in with another wrestler. But at least on paper, you gotta say that it's likely that Mendes gets him down eventually. He is going to be relentlessly attempting takedowns. That defines this guy. His striking is also really good, especially for someone who's mainly considered a wrestler and who also has poor reach for his division. That means he can't dictate the pace. He can't control the cage, but he is accurate and he is powerful. And frankly, he's scored just as many knockdowns in the UFC as Conor McGregor, although Conor McGregor has scored them faster. Now, this would be a pretty big size differential if these two guys face off. So again, all the striking metrics indicate that McGregor should be getting the better of the striking. He should be dictating where the fight goes in terms of around the cage, but he is going to have to worry about those takedown attempts. So that's a huge wild card. Generally speaking, you got to lean towards the wrestler. If his hands are at least competent, he does have good head strike defense, although, again, you guys mentioned he's been dropped twice now by Jose Aldo. He can be dropped. But you got to lean with the wrestler slightly. This is one, so many wild cards here. For example, the lack of training and preparation that McGregor has had for the wrestler, the short notice for Mendes. Who knows what kind of condition he was in just a couple weeks ago, if he was taking it easy, waiting to see how this fight played out. Lots and lots of wild cards here, so it's not one that I would be investing in heavily. And if anything, I'd be leaning towards Mendes, especially if you're getting plus money on him. We'll see where the lines end up, but given all the action that keeps coming in on McGregor, I wouldn't be surprised to see him push to a clear favorite. So I would probably lean wrestler just out of historical trends, admitting full well that McGregor is going to get the better of him on the feet. But either way, this is an intriguing matchup because it answers a lot of questions about McGregor. And if he gets past Chad Mendes, wow, that is a huge testament. Either way, this one's going to be edge of my seat type of fight. I can't wait to see it. If not going to be disappointed at all, to not see the Aldo fight immediately, eventually we will see that fight with all that they've invested in it. So these are two matchups that eventually should happen one way or the other, and both of them are going to be great.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 189. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast, featuring our premium bets, will be out the Friday following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsBreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert. If you prefer that method, just send a message to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side next weekend.